Hi, this is Katie Johnson. Thanks for joining me today. Usually on Mondays I go live at 1 o'clock, but today's project has some time-consuming parts and involves some heat embossing, and so I thought I would just edit those things out so that you could just watch the project take shape. Now, I have a very specific idea here, and for the layout, what I wanted to do is to come up with some squares that were going to be offset from each other. So I've already pre-die cut these squares. I'm using the second smallest square from the Stylish Shapes dies. And the fun thing about this, if you look at that die right up close, you can see it's got that cutting edge in the middle, but it's got stitching on both sides. So I'm actually using the piece that was cut out because I wanted the square, but this is what's left over. So if you were going to use these dies, you could actually use the hole and you get some real pretty stitching around the outside of the hole as well. But that's not what I'm doing today. So the layout is going to be 3 squares like this, and I'm going to put this middle one up on dimensionals. Now I've got 2 others over here. These were not die cut. They were actually cut with my paper trimmer a little bit smaller because for some reason I felt like I wanted a little bit more dimension on these 2 outside ones. Just a little bit of extra height, but not as much height as you'd get from a dimensional, so I'm going to put these behind them. I'm getting ready to create the background that I'm going to use for the surface of these squares over here. And I've pulled out some colors that seemed very floral to me. So I've got a bright green with the granny apple green. I've got an intense blue with the blueberry bushel. And then I've got a yellow. This is lemon lolly. And I pulled out a couple of pinks. This is berry burst and bubble bath. I have my ink pads all laid out here ready to go, and I've pulled in my blending brushes, and you can see that there's some staining on the blending brushes. That just happens. I tend to use one for all my oranges and yellows, another one for all my pinks. I've got them dedicated by color grouping, and then as far as cleaning, you can put these underneath water and just rinse them to get them clean. Otherwise, I'll just use a towel or an old piece of scrap paper. But if I can go like this on my towel and not get any color off, then I know I'm pretty safe with coming in with my colors. So I'm just going to add some splotches of yellow. We're going to come out with my lighter pink. And again, I'm going to check it before I put it in my ink pad, make sure that it's clean, which it is. Come pick up some pinks here. And I think I want a lot of this light pink compared to the other colors. And because it's a lighter color that I'm starting with, I can always come back and add darker colors on top, which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. I'm getting off this lighter colored ink, and then I'm coming into my darker ink pad. See, now it's getting all the ink off. And this will be fine to go in for its next use. Let's add some green. My plan was to come back in with a detailed flower and heat emboss in gold. And one of the reasons I chose this is because I wanted an open network so that we'd see a lot of the colors showing through on the petals. The other reason I chose this is because this is a photopolymer stamp and I can see through it. I am not worried at all about the fact that this is stained. It just happens when you use stamps a lot. My philosophy is if your stamps aren't stained, they haven't been loved. All right, I'm pulling out my gold embossing powder, and I keep my embossing powders in a tray like this because it's just so easy to sprinkle over the tray and catch all the mess, and then I don't have a mess on my countertop here. When you heat emboss, you want to stamp in Versamark or some other ink that is going to be very gooey. Now, the fact that it's photopolymer means I can see through it, and I can go ahead and put my center of my flower right over that yellow. going to come back in and recreate this background because I forgot to do something, but it's a good chance for me to show you so you don't make a similar mistake. The background inks that I have on here, they are still wet. And they're wet enough that they've caught this embossing powder here. I was going for this kind of a look, but I ended up with a mess. I'm actually going to heat emboss this and see how it turned out. Well, that wasn't my plan, but actually, I think I kind of like it. You know, a lot of what happens in stamping and crafting is happy accidents. So all this little bit of gold that's still showing through back there, I actually kind of like it. However, before I finish up, I do want to add a lot more petals. Now that I can see them, because these are gold embossed, now I can go back in and fill in some of those spaces. And just for finishing the conversation, you'll notice that I did not have a problem this second time around with the gold catching on all this outside part because I heat set it, and so therefore it wasn't wet and it didn't stick to the powder, didn't have the powder stick to it. All right, I've pulled my card base back out. This is the piece that I ended up now with, that gold embossing on top of the sponging. Isn't that pretty? So pretty. And you know what? That would make a great background piece all by itself. But instead of using it as a whole, I'm going to feature just parts of it. So let me cut it down. Here are the pieces that I ended up with when I cut it down. And look how much extra I have left over. I can probably make 2 more cards out of these pieces. All right, I'm going to adhere these to my, my stitch squares. All right, I want this card to be an over-the-top wow card, so I'm actually going to emboss this back piece. And I think this is a good chance to use my brand new exposed brick embossing folder. I really like the look of the embossing folder on there. It makes an awesome background for this. Next, what you see me doing is playing around with these little squares and rotating them and trying to get what I felt was the best color distribution for these things. I love that pop of the gold. Next up was to try to choose a sentiment. And at first, what I decided was to stamp it in black because I love the pop of contrast. And I fussy cut it. There's no dye that goes with this, but I love the look that you get when you fussy cut a sentiment like that. And it's pretty easy to fussy cut something like that. I laid it on there, and then I decided that I didn't really like that black. It was just too much contrast with the rest of the card that felt more soft and elegant. So I did go back and I did the same thing, but I repeated it with gold embossing. Now I'm ready to put the parts together. Definitely planning on using dimensionals on the word and that middle square. And then the other 2 squares, they're going to just be set down low. All right, I'm going to use my liquid glue in here, and the reason for using my liquid glue is because of the bumpy surface on this. I was afraid that that double-sided tape wouldn't stick as well, and I don't know if you noticed me very carefully flipping it because I wanted to make sure that I had the orientation the way that I had planned and didn't like turn it 90 degrees as I was flipping my paper. All right, now comes the stop talking part. And these 2 go on first, not just because the one in the middle is going to be on top, but also because putting them on first allows me the opportunity to line it up visually. The liquid glue lets me see when I've got it on there crooked. And then I can shift this just a little bit if I need to, again, to make sure that it's not crooked. Then I'm going to flip the whole thing upside down so I can press it really hard. And then while I have this upside down, now I can go ahead and put adhesive on here. And some in the middle too, just because again of the ridges in there because of the embossing, I want to make sure that it's not going to fall off. And then again, turn it upside down to make sure that it's well adhered on. Add my middle square. Use the edge pieces too, especially on something long and skinny like this. And now we're going to add a little bit more bling. So now I'm ready to add a little bit more bling. I'm going to use some rhinestones in here. See what I'm doing here? I love my take your pick tool, pointy end to move them, nudge it around a little bit as needed, and then use that cap to press it down tight. So before I'm done, I got a teeny little bit of ink smudge in the corner down here. I'm pulling in a mono eraser. This is not a Stampin' Up! Product, but you can get this in art supply stores or buy it online. A sand eraser will work for small amounts of ink. It's not going to work for huge ink smudges, but when you got just a little bit from a fingerprint, it's going to work to take that off. So there is today's card with the embossing in the background, or texture embossing in the background, heat embossing on top of sponging. Let me know in the comments what you think, and we will catch you back here next Monday for another project.